War of the Worlds. The War of the Worlds. 4. The cylinder opens. When I returned to the common, the sun was setting. Scattered groups were hurrying from the direction of Woking, and 1 or 2 persons were returning. The crowd by the pit had increased and stood out black against the lemon yellow of the sky. A couple of 100 people, perhaps. There were raised voices, and some sort of struggle appeared to be going on about the pit. Strange imaginings passed through my mind. As I drew nearer, I heard Stent's voice.
Okay, so here we have then the setting of the sun. So with that comes more dramatic tension because we've got the end of a day, the end of that same day. So when the sun sets in literature, and often in films as well, it kind of symbolises, I suppose it can be a signal that something bad might happen. When the darkness comes, that's when we sort of get frightened in a horror film, for example. It's the very opposite to when the sun is rising and the dawn of a new day, which is often quite optimistic and positive. It can be quite doom and gloom when the sun's setting. But we've also got incrementum here, where the crowd is getting bigger and bigger. The crowd about the pit had increased. So we've got incrementum there, I-N-C-R-E-N-T-U-M, incrementum. And it's the increasing size of the crowd, which again does 2 things. It increases the tension because there's something interesting happening and there's a bigger crowd to watch, but there's also the danger of the more people there, the more people who will get injured, as is exactly what happens. Just another thing about the imagery there, the crowd stood out black against the lemon yellow of the sky. Quite a figurative description there, if you remember back to the descriptive writing coursework. Things like compound adjectives of lemon yellow are sort of quite figurative and descriptive, making us think of lemons and therefore fruit and health and nutrition and sort of nice colours, like our coursework folder, in fact. But in this case, it's the crowd that's standing out black against them, and obviously the blackness there suggests uncertainty as well, perhaps, and something less attractive.
Keep back! Keep back!
A boy came running towards me.
It's moving,
he said to me as he passed.
It's screwing out. I don't like it. I'm going. I'm going, I am.
So in my copy of the book, I think he's going home, isn't he? Is the boy? I'm going home. I am. I'm going home. And I think the point of it's direct speech that we've got here from these characters, from Stent first of all with keep back, and then from the boy as well. And the direct speech serves to again immerse the reader in the scene. It makes us feel like we're there, hearing the voices for ourselves, hearing these characters for ourselves. So just like in your narrative writing, speech is used to drive forward the narrative, but also to immerse the reader in the world of the narrative. And here we've got this sort of dialect speech. He's obviously clearly a Londoner, the ways words are written, and again it's presenting the everyday or representing the everyday person. There's a sense of fear now, which is quite right, foreshadowing what happens very soon when the cylinder does open and out comes the heat ray.
I went on to the crowd. There were really, I should think, 200 or 300 people, elbowing and jostling one another, the 1 or 2 ladies there being by no means the least active.
It's fallen in the pit,
cried someone.
Keep back,
said several.
Okay, so here we've got these single line bits of dialogue. And when we have single line bits of dialogue, there's a name for that. I'll tell you what the effect is first of all. It creates a rapid pace when there's just one. What I mean by one line of dialogue is just like, for example, when someone says he's fallen in the pit, and then someone else says something else, keep back, for example. There's not lengthy dialogue, it's just single lines really. And it's called stichomythia, which is spelled STICHOMYTHIA. And don't ask me how much you get for that in Scrabble, but I imagine quite a lot. And what that does is it creates a rapid pace and a sense of frenzy. So you often find it, for example, in plays when there's an argument, you find characters having stichomythia or using stichomythia because the lines are very short, and it's almost like the heartbeat of the text gets faster and faster because the line length is so short. And you've got that here. So there's a sense of increasing fear, increasing tension, a bit of mounting hysteria as well, actually, as the people shouting and even the ladies who are elbowing and jostling each other to get a good view. There's 200 or 300 people now, so more incrementum. It's quite a sizable crowd, and a real sense of hysteria from Stent trying to keep them all back, and from the people who are trying to see and get a good view.
The crowd swayed a little, and I elbowed my way through. Everyone seemed greatly excited. I heard a peculiar humming sound from the pit.
There we've got more sensory imagery. We've had things we can hear, things we can see rather, and things we can hear. And now we've got the people talking, but also the sound, a peculiar humming sound. Nothing recognisable, an unusual sound, an unsettling sound. So H.G. Wells, they're using some sensory imagery to unsettle the reader.
"I say," said Ogilvy, "keep these idiots back. We don't know what's in the confounded thing, you know." I saw a young man, a shop assistant in Woking, I believe he was, standing on the cylinder and trying to scramble out of the hole again. The crowd had pushed him in.
So more evidence of this hysteria, and it's an example of where people often end up being the worst in these situations, in chaotic situations. It's people who are frightening more than anything else, and obviously this gets superseded quite quickly by the Martians, who are terrifying. But even still, the general behaviour of mob mentality is pretty ugly. And we've seen it ourselves in real life, haven't we? We know this is what happens, and this was happening even then, more than 100 years ago. And H.G. Wells is really holding up a mirror, reflecting what people are like, what society is like, and sort of showing how ugly things get very, very quickly. It's worth mentioning that Ogilvy's speaking, Stent is speaking. These are two recognised and reputable scientists. They're men of reason, men of logic, men who base their thinking on evidence, and they're not ones who you'd associate with being particularly emotional or particularly irrational. Quite the opposite. So for them to be reacting in this way, this panicking way, suggests even more need for fear and more need for panic. It's a bit like if you're a science teacher who you sort of associate as being someone of very calm rationality, starts to panic and get into a hysteria, then it's really time to worry. If I get into a hysteria, it's not, that's par for the course, because English teachers are fairly emotive types anyway, but not so much, physics teachers. They're quite, they're cool as a cucumber, aren't they, those types? Just like Stent and like Ogilvy, except now they're not, because this is getting a scary situation even for them.
The end of the cylinder was being screwed out from within. Nearly 2 feet of shining screw projected. Somebody blundered against me, and I narrowly missed being pitched onto the top of the screw. I turned, and as I did, the screw must have come out, for the lid of the cylinder fell upon the gravel with a ringing concussion. I stuck my elbow into the person behind me and turned my head towards the thing again. For a moment, that circular cavity seemed perfectly black. I had the sunset in my eyes.
And there we have it again, that symbolism of black. The circular cavity seemed perfectly black. Black representing the unknown. You can't see what's in there, and no one can. And so it's the uncertainty, the unknown of what's in there makes it more frightening. And it's a technique that lots of writers have used. If you ever get the chance to read the story called The Red Room, which is also by H.G. Wells, it's a horror story. And like many horror stories, it uses the unknown. It uses fear, really, as its motivating driving force. It's not so much the monster that's scary; it's the fear that's the thing that creates the sort of feeling of being scared. It's the fear itself. And The Red Room is a really good. It only takes about 15-20 minutes to read, but it's well worth a read if you want to have a look at that. if you get a chance. And like many horror writers or thrillers, or even in films as well, if you think about it, once you've seen the monster, it's less scary. It's all about the build-up, and not seeing the monster is more scary than actually seeing it. A good example, if you've seen the film Jaws, is a classic example of where we don't see the shark for a long time into the film, because actually it's far more scary to not see it than it is to see this rubber mechanical shark thing that they've used in the film. So it's a very old technique that creatives have used for many, many years.
I think everyone expected to see a man emerge. Possibly something a little unlike us terrestrial men, but in all essentials, a man. I know I did. But looking, I presently saw something stirring within the shadow. Greyish, billowy movements, one above another, and then two luminous discs, like eyes.
So this is a very important point in the novel. It's our first sight of the Martians actually inside the cylinder. And what H.G. Wells does here, again, is similar to the point I've just made, is he withholds information. We don't find... Oh, excuse me. It's very late at night I'm recording this. He doesn't reveal to us much at first. He says that he sort of makes us wait a bit longer. He withholds the information. That's the technique, withholding information, by telling us what he thought he expected to see and what people expected to see, rather than actually what they did look like. And even when he starts to, he says he sees something stirring within the shadow. Again, it's very vague, isn't it? It's withholding information, something stirring within the shadow. Even the sibilance there of the S sound, something stirring, shadow, is quite hissing, sort of sibilant sounds, which is a bit more unsettling. If we think of hissing, we think of snakes, and we get that in a few sentences. We get the reference to snakes as well. So already we've got the sibilance here that lends us to thinking in those terms even before he tells us. And then two luminous discs like eyes. So the first thing we see is something not eyes, but something like eyes. Well, it's quite frightening and unsettling. We're not sure what this is, but it's got these two luminous discs. It makes it sound very unnatural. You might want to refer to it as, in fact, you could refer to it as chromomorphism, because it's sort of not describing it as something living, but as something almost, something mechanical if it has discs. So chromomorphism, CHREMAMORPHISM, crema or crema morphism.
And something resembling a little grey snake, about the thickness of a walking stick, coiled up out of the writhing middle and wriggled in the air towards me. And then another.
So there we have it, the zoomorphism now of something resembling a little grey snake. And of course, when we hear snakes, we think of, it's been used by writers ever since the Bible, hasn't it? Including the Bible, in fact. If you think of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, in Genesis, you've got the fall of Eve, caused by Satan, who appears as a snake. So serpents and snakes have had a bad press since the Bible, really. And of course, lots of writers, including, if you think modern writers like J.K. Rowling, have used snakes in Harry Potter for the same reason, Slytherin for the same reason. So it's a common literary trope, what's called a trope, TROPE, which means a common feature of literature to use snakes to represent something bad or evil. And not just one snake, but then another. So it's writhing around, and it wriggles in the air towards me, so there's more fear there, and then another, incrementum, getting worse, more of them happening now. It's sort of not just one snake, but two, and of course, even more than that. That makes it even more dangerous.
A sudden chill came over me. There was a loud shriek from a woman behind. I half turned, keeping my eyes fixed upon the cylinder still, from which other tentacles were now projecting, and began pushing my way back from the edge of the pit. I saw astonishment giving place to horror on the faces of the people about me. I heard inarticulate exclamations on all sides. There was a general movement backwards. I saw the shopman struggling, still on the edge of the pit. I found myself alone, and saw the people on the other side of the pit running off, Stent among them. I looked again at the cylinder.
An ungovernable terror gripped me. I stood, petrified and staring.
Okay, so lots happening here then. Essentially, we've got more withholding of information because we're not quite sure what happens next. We see some snakes or things that look like snakes crawling out the cylinder. There's a lot of fear, people panicking. He himself is petrified and staring, but we're not quite sure what's causing the terror until the next paragraph. So he's withholding that information, building the dramatic tension all the time. And that's one thing. Stent is one of the ones running away. So again, if the Astronomer Royal, a man of science, a man of logic and reason, is running away, then we all need to run away, essentially. So it's important that he is also full of panic and fear, someone who you wouldn't associate with acting hysterically or emotionally, and yet there he is doing just that. So that's important. And then you've got the ungovernable terror. So what you've got here is you've got this adjective describing the terror. This isn't just terror. This is Marks and Spencer's terror. No, this is ungovernable terror. So you can refer to that as an adjective because it is. You can refer to it as a pre-modifier because it pre-modifies the word terror, or you can refer to it as an epithet, E-P-I-T-H-E-T, epithet, because it's kind of fixed to the word terror. It's ungovernable terror. So you can just say adjective, that's absolutely fine as long as you explain the effect of that. It enhances and intensifies the word terror. But there's a few ways of looking at that. It's no one way is any more right than the others, but it's just giving you the options there. Now, it's what the terror does that's important. The terror grips him. Now, that's personifying the terror. The terror is doing something. It's gripping him. So he's gripped by terror. Terror is being personified, and therefore it's more frightening and more dramatic tension is being built up. I stood petrified and staring. So this is a really tense moment because we're about to find out what exactly is making him so frightened and what's inside this cylinder. Now the next extract, starting with a big greyish rounded bulk that we'll hear in a second, is the extract they used for the 2018 question paper. So it's worth, as we read through this together, and it goes to halfway down the next page, and I'll tell you when the extract ends, so you get a sense of how long the extracts are, but also what to look out for, and well, more importantly, what the examiners are looking for in an extract, because they will choose for you an extract, but it has to be an extract that has enough to say about it. So we'll look at this one and look at why I think it was chosen, and hopefully that makes sense as well, because then it will help you to know what to look out for too. And when you know that, you can kind of, as you're reading it, you think, oh, this is a likely one to come up in the exam because it's so rich or so full of potential for analysis.
A big, greyish round bulk, the size perhaps of a bear, was rising slowly and painfully out of the cylinder. As it bulged up and caught the light, it glistened like wet leather.
So notice here how we're still not describing, or he's not describing much about the thing itself. It's a big greyish rounded bulk, the size perhaps of a bear. It doesn't really give us much to go on. It's quite vague, and that's the point. It's more withholding information. It's more frightening to not know what it is than to know what it is. So there's more zoomorphism or zoomorphic description by comparing it to a bear. Well, bears are dangerous, aren't they? Bears can attack and kill humans. So by comparing it to a bear, it's quite an important choice there. It's rising slowly and painfully out of the cylinder, and so even if movements are unnatural and sort of unsettling, as it bulged up and caught the light, it glistened like wet leather. So again, another simile there. In fact, a simile comparing it to a bear as well, a zoomorphic simile first of all, and then glistened like wet leather. What an awful image. I mean, if you imagine wet leather sort of slippery and sort of shiny, it doesn't sound very attractive to look at, I suppose.
Two large dark-coloured eyes were regarding me, steadfastly. The mass that framed them, the head of the thing, was rounded and had, one might say, a face.
So of course, as humans, we recognise faces. We find it very unsettling when things don't have a face, and that's why masks are so frightening, and that's why in horror films so much is made of using faces or lack of faces as a fear factor. And here this thing has not really a face, but what one might call a face, which is really unsettling. We don't really know what it looks like, but we know it's not really a face as such. It's not like a normal face, and that's therefore quite frightening too, because we sort of judge everything by its face, don't we? That's how we look at the world and things in the world, and so we find a lack of face very frightening.
There was a mouth under the eyes, the lipless brim of which quivered and panted and dropped saliva.
There's some hendiadys there, with quivered and panted, essentially the same thing. I mean, it's sort of quick movements, isn't it? Quivering is sort of the muscle spasms. Panting, of course, is breathing quickly. They both amount to the same thing. So there's hendiadys there, Hendiadys, and that's we're going to talk about language points and structural points. And hendiadys kind of covers both, really. It's sort of the structure of language, if you like. It's structuring two words next to each other. So you can get marks for it either way, whether you want to talk about it as language or structure. But it's the point is it intensifies the phrase quivered and panted. It makes both sound more intense, and it drops saliva. So it's sort of dribbling and oozing. Its skin's like wet leather, and it's dropping liquid out its mouth. It's quite disgusting to look at, and something unsettling about it. And even now, if you think about the sort of some of the depictions of Martians and aliens, if you see on the TV and in film, I'm thinking of The Simpsons particularly, where those Martian things are always drooling, aren't they? And it's still something which we use today as a sort of recognisable feature of aliens, and it started here with H.G. Wells.
The whole creature heaved and pulsated convulsively. A lank, tentacular appendage gripped the edge of the cylinder, another swayed in the air.
Okay, so heaved and pulsated is another example of hendiadys. Both very similar words, both do the same thing. The whole thing is like shivering almost. It's unnatural and doesn't look comfortable or seem happy. It seems unpredictable and dangerous. It's heaving and pulsating convulsively. And then a lank, I have to be careful how to pronounce this, tentacular appendage. So like a tentacle, more zoomorphism then, because if we think of tentacle, do you know, last year I pronounced it incorrectly to year 11 last year, and you can imagine the hilarity. Its tentacular appendage makes us think of octopuses. Not sure the plural of octopus, but anyway, it makes you think of an octopus, and which again is sort of sea creatures. We might think of the kraken, like a frightful sea creature in mythology, and certainly H.G. Wells is very aware of mythology and literary references that maybe we're less aware of today, because we perhaps we do read less than certainly the Victorians did. You know, they didn't have Netflix, did they? So they had to read a book, and so he's using things that we perhaps wouldn't pick up on as such today. But I think certainly writing down the kraken, Kraken, and maybe worth a quick Google if you can, a kraken, just a frightful sea creature really in lots of old myths and legends.
Those who have never seen a living Martian can scarcely imagine the horror of its appearance. The peculiar V-shaped mouth with its pointed upper lip, the absence of brow ridges, the absence of a chin beneath the wedge-like lower lip, the incessant quivering of this mouth, the gorgon, groups of tentacles, the tumultuous breathing of the lungs in a strange atmosphere, the evident heaviness and painfulness of movement due to the greater gravitational energy of the Earth.
So here we've got some quite interesting scientific rationale to describe why, or to explain why the Martian does behave in this way. We learn that it's pulsating and struggling because of the greater gravitational energy of Earth. So he's using the scientific lexis again. He's using scientific theory to make a more convincing novel. You know, they would weigh more on Earth than they would on Mars because of the greater gravitational pull. Earth is bigger than Mars, therefore has a greater gravitational pull. And so it makes sense that they would struggle, and it makes sense that they would be heaving and panting and huffing and puffing and sweating and whatever else. And so he's using science there to make this even more credible, even more believable, and that's what makes this such an authentic and frightening description. And I mentioned before about the use of mythology and legends, and here we have this reference to the Gorgons, and you'll know probably that the Gorgons were a group of 3 women, and Medusa being the most famous, with snakes for hair. So these tentacles, these groups of tentacles, are like gorgons, the gorgons' hair, snakes in their hair, or snakes for hair, writhing around on their heads. So he's making that link there between the Martians' appearance and the appearance of gorgons in the Greek mythology, in Greek myths. And of course the gorgons were very dangerous because they could turn anyone to stone who looked at them would be turned to stone. So they were fatal, they were deadly. And so it's significant that he's drawing on that particular analogy there. Analogy is spelled A-N-A-L-O-G-Y. Analogy. It just means comparing something to something else.
Above all, the extraordinary intensity of the immense eyes were at once vital, intense, inhuman, crippled, and monstrous. There was something fungoid in the oily brown skin, something in the clumsy deliberation of the tedious movements, unshakably nasty. Even at this first encounter, this first glimpse, I was overcome with disgust and dread.
So here, if we just back up a few lines, we've got the asyndetic list of the vital, intense, inhuman, crippled and monstrous. That's lots of adjectives there being bunched together in an asyndetic list. A-S-Y-N-D-E-T-I-C. Asyndetic. Meaning there's no connectives, it's just a list of words separated by commas. It's asyndetic because it's without connectives. You think of like atheist is someone without religion, so when you see a before a word, asymptomatic means no symptoms. So here an asyndetic list is there's no connectives to join them together, and so that's what we have here. And there's something fungoid, so like a fungus, mouldy, in the oily brown skin. It sounds hideous, doesn't it? Something that to our senses would be something rotten. In the oily brown skin, something in the clumsy deliberation of the tedious movements, unspeakably nasty. Even at this first encounter, this first glimpse, I was overcome with disgust and dread. Now those last 2 words, more hendiadys there. So H-E-N-D-I-A-D-Y-S. Because both words mean the same thing, disgust and dread. And notice how they both start with the same letter. In fact, there's 3 D sounds there. There's the D at the beginning of disgust, and there's the D at the beginning of dread, and the D at the end of dread. So overall it's a very heavy alliterative sound, and that again emphasises those words by having both together, hendiadys and alliteration there, heavy alliteration, creates that overwhelming feel of dread as he has it himself.
Suddenly the monster vanished. It had toppled over the brim of the cylinder and fallen into the pit with a thud, like the fall of a great mass of leather. I heard it give a peculiar, thick cry, and forthwith another of these creatures appeared, darkly, in the deep shadow of the aperture.
So a bit of incrementum there, more, just like we saw with the little snake-like thing when the cylinder first opened. Here we have another of these creatures, so it's getting more and more. It was scary enough having 1, now there's 2, so it's incrementally getting more and more frightening.
I turned and, running madly, made for the first group of trees, perhaps 100 yards away. But I ran slantingly and stumbling, for I could not avert my face from these things.
And that's where the extract ends from the 2018 exam paper. And finishing with that word things, again, we've looked at that word before, that thing. It's the uncertainty, it's the fact it can't be labelled, it's an unknown that makes it even more frightening. The unknown is far more frightening than the known, isn't it? And that's, again, what good writers play on that, because it's the fear of the unknown that really is what gets to us, I think. And so that's the end of that extract. So you can get a sense of how long the extracts are. They're not massively long. but they're usually full of rich description or important events in the novel.
There, among some young pine trees and furze bushes, I stopped, panting, and waiting further developments. The common round the sandpits was dotted with people, standing like myself in a half-fascinated terror, staring at these creatures, or rather at the heaped gravel at the edge of the pit in which they lay. And then, with a renewed horror, I saw a round, black object bobbing up and down on the edge of the pit. It was the head of the shopman who had fallen in, but showing as a little black object against the hot western sky. Now he got his shoulder and knee up, and again he seemed to slip back until only his head was visible. Suddenly he vanished, and I could have fancied a faint shriek had reached me. I had a momentary impulse to go back and help him, but my fears overruled.
So there's our first casualty at the hands of the Martians, or at the tentacles of the Martians. And is it just a random person? Well, not really, because we met him earlier, didn't we? We were introduced to him in this chapter earlier on as someone we'd seen being thrown into the pit. Not his own choice. The crowd had sort of pushed him in, and he was trying his best to come out. And of course now he presumably is killed by the Martians as their first victim. We know this from the faint shriek. So there is some characterization built up here. We feel more for this person because we were introduced to him vaguely earlier in the chapter, and that was a structural choice of H.G. Wells to make this have more impact when he does get killed by the Martians.
Everything was then quite invisible, hidden by the deep pit and the heap of sand that the fall of the cylinder had made. Anyone coming along the road from Chobham or Woking would have been amazed at the sight. A dwindling multitude of perhaps 100 people or more standing in a great irregular circle, in ditches, behind bushes, behind gates and hedges, saying little to one another. And that, in short, excited shouts and staring hard at a few heaps of sand. The barrow of ginger beer stood, a queer derelict, black against the burning sky. And in the sandpits was a row of deserted vehicles with their horses feeding out of nosebags or pawing the ground.
Okay, so here we've not got the familiar false sense of security end of this chapter. That ship has sailed, hasn't it? That's gone now, because here we know that these things are dangerous, and we've just got a fairly bleak description at the end of this chapter. So bleak, in fact, that the place is derelict. The little man selling his ginger beer and his snacks is now derelict. So he is also either, presumably run away from his cart. Again, we knew him from before. His characterization was built earlier in the chapter. Again, the blackness against the burning sky. The sky is burning because it's a sunset. They're looking to the west and away from London, actually, and they're east of if you imagine they're looking west towards the sunset, with London behind them, if you like, and the Martians and the pit is in between them and the sunset, so they're silhouetted against the sky. And of course that also adds uncertainty because they're just these black figures, and with blackness comes that uncertainty and also a sense of being burned. Although he mentions black and burning, there's a sense of destruction here as well, which very much foreshadows what happens later in the book when they do, in fact in the next chapter, I think, isn't it? Chapter 5, in the heat ray, when the place does get burnt by the heat ray. And that's it for that chapter. Only a short one, but lots to say about it, and clearly it was important enough to be used in 2018 for the exam, so it's one certainly to be well aware of.